Children aren't supposed to vanish, especially not in groups, but 5 disappeared after a house fire. 3 vanished from a beach in broad daylight, and in one coastal town, they were returned, and no longer knew who they were. Stay until the end. Case 3 is the one you'll never forget. Case 1. The Sodder Children. The Christmas that stole 5 lives. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in the quiet Appalachian town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. The war had just ended. Spirits were high, snow blanketed the hills, and the Sodder household was filled with warmth and light. George and Jenny Sodder, Italian immigrants who had built a new life in America, were raising 10 children in their 2-story home just off Route 16. That night, 5 of the children, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8 and Betty 5 asked to stay up late to play with toys they had received earlier in the day. Jenny agreed as it was Christmas, and they had been looking forward to it all year. Around 10 p.m., the parents and the older children retired to bed upstairs, while the younger ones remained downstairs. Around 1:00 a.m., Jenny was awakened by the phone ringing. She came downstairs and answered. A woman's voice asked for someone Jenny didn't know. There was laughter in the background, and the caller had an odd, almost drunken tone. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and hung up. As she did, she noticed that the lights were still on and the curtains opened strange, since the children knew to turn everything off before bed. She saw that the front door was unlocked. She returned to bed, but not long after she was jolted awake again by a loud thud on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. Then silence. Moments later, the smell of smoke filled the house. Jenny shook George awake, and together they rushed to get their children out. They were able to get out with 4 of the kids, Sylvia the youngest, Marion, who had come home from work, and 2 of the older boys. But the 5 children who had been downstairs were nowhere to be seen. George tried to reach them. He smashed a window to re-enter the burning house, slicing his arm open. He couldn't get past the flames. The staircase was already collapsing. He ran to grab the ladder that always leaned against the house. It was gone. He tried to move one of his coal trucks to climb into the 2nd floor, but both trucks, which had worked fine the day before, would not start. The family could do nothing but watch in horror as the house burned to the ground in under 45 minutes. By morning, the local fire chief told them that no remains had been found in the ashes. This was odd. 5 children's bodies should have been visible, or at least some bones. The fire hadn't burned hot enough or long enough to completely cremate them. An inquest was held. Authorities declared the children dead from the fire, insisting their remains must have been overlooked in the ash. But George and Jenny didn't believe it. And what came next only deepened the mystery. A phone repairman said the house's phone line had been cut, not burned. A witness saw a man stealing block and tackle equipment from the Sodder property the night before. Another neighbor said she saw the missing children looking out from a passing car during the fire. Months later, Jenny saw a photo of a girls' school in New York and was convinced one of the girls looked like her daughter Betty. George traveled there, but the school refused to let him in. Jenny even began experimenting, burning chicken bones, pork bones, beef bones in her own oven to see if fire could really destroy bones completely. They always remained. The family consulted a crematorium, which confirmed that it takes over 2 hours at 2,000 degrees to cremate a body fully. Their house burned for 45 minutes. The Sodders became convinced their children had been kidnapped and that someone had set the fire to cover it up. But why? One possible motive: George's vocal opposition to Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy. He had gotten into heated arguments with other Italian immigrants in town. A man had even come to their home a year earlier warning, "George, your house will go up in smoke and your children will be destroyed." Still, no arrests were ever made. In the years that followed, the Sodders turned their grief into obsession. They put up a massive billboard along Route 16 with the children's faces offering rewards for information. The sign remained up for over 40 years, becoming a haunting local landmark. One of the strangest twists came in 1967. George received an envelope in the mail postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his 20s. On the back was a cryptic message, Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Ill boys. A90132 or 35. The man resembled Louis, same high cheekbones, same dark eyes. The Sodders hired a private investigator to go to Kentucky, but he vanished and was never heard from again. Despite all their efforts, the case was never solved. Jenny Sodder wore black every day for the rest of her life. George died in 1969, still not knowing what had happened to his 5 children. Their surviving sons and daughters carried on the investigation until the 1980s, but the trail went cold. Even decades later, children and grandchildren of the Sodders would revisit old letters, photos, and notes. One of George's grandsons reportedly tried to use modern DNA databases to test distant matches from the mysterious photo, but nothing conclusive ever came from it. Some theorists have suggested that the children were taken as part of a human trafficking operation or by someone seeking revenge for George's political views. Others believe they were killed that night and the clues were all just false hope. But there are too many questions, too many strange details that don't add up. Why was the ladder missing? Why did both trucks fail? Why was there a thud on the roof and a rolling noise? Why did the fire department take hours to respond? And why didn't they call in help immediately? The billboard now gone once asked. What was the motive of the law officers involved? What did they have to gain by making us suffer all these years of injustice? To this day, the disappearance of the Sodder children remains one of the most haunting, unsolved mysteries in American history. 5 children went to bed on Christmas Eve, and the world never saw them again. In the decades that followed, the Sodder case became more than just a family's tragedy, it became folklore. Local newspapers ran anniversary pieces, true crime magazines dissected every lead, and amateur sleuths began writing letters to the family, offering theories or tips. Some believed the children had been adopted under new names, possibly by people with connections to social services or even military circles. Others said they were taken across the border into Canada or Mexico, where they would grow up unaware of who they really were. What haunted people most was how ordinary it all had seemed before the fire. The Sodders were a hard-working, respected family. George ran a trucking business. Jenny kept the house running smoothly. The kids were known in school. They weren't isolated, nor were they the kind of family one would expect to fall into mystery. And maybe that's why it stuck, because it could have been anyone. Theories multiplied as time passed. One claimed the fire was a cover-up by local authorities who had a vendetta against George. Another pointed to organized crime or an underground adoption ring. A retired school teacher from Charleston wrote to the Sodders, claiming she overheard 2 men in a bar discussing how they'd been paid to set the fire. But like all the leads before, it went nowhere. Jenny kept every letter, every photo, every strange message. She kept the Christmas stockings up every year, all 10 of them, even though 5 remained untouched. As media interest waned, the family tried one last push in the 1980s. They worked with private detectives and television crews. A short segment aired on Unsolved Mysteries. Hundreds of tips poured in, but none led anywhere definitive. One woman claimed to be Martha. Another said she had raised Louis under a different name. Yet DNA testing was either unavailable or inconclusive in those years. Technology hadn't caught up with the scope of the mystery. When Jenny passed away in 1989, she was buried next to George, still in black. The surviving Sodder children, now elderly themselves, debated whether to keep investigating. Some believed their siblings were gone and had made peace with it. Others felt they owed it to their parents to never give up. In recent years, a few descendants attempted to use online ancestry tools and public DNA databases to cross-match possible links to Louis or Maurice. So far, no match has ever been confirmed, but the case remains open in the eyes of the family. What happened on that Christmas night remains buried under layers of smoke, silence, and time. And the question still burns, did 5 children really vanish into thin air, or did someone make sure they did? Case 2, the Beaumont children. 3 kids, 1 beach, and a vanishing that stunned a nation. On the morning of January 26, 1966, Australia Day, the weather in Adelaide was perfect. The sun was out, families were celebrating, and Glenelg Beach, just a short ride from the city, was filled with laughter, umbrellas, and the scent of sea salt. Among the crowd were 3 siblings, Jane 9, Arna 7, and Grant Beaumont 4. They left their home in the suburb of Somerton Park to take the bus to Glenelg Beach, just over 2 kilometers away. Their mother, Nancy, had let them go alone for the first time. The neighborhood was quiet, safe. It was the 1960s. Children walked to school alone, played in the streets, and the Beaumont kids were polite, responsible, Jane especially, who took her role as the eldest seriously. They were supposed to return home by noon, but they never came back. At first, Nancy thought they had missed the bus. Maybe they stayed a little longer. But as the hours stretched on, unease turned to panic. By late afternoon, she called her husband, Jim, who rushed home from work. They searched the beach nearby streets called Neighbors. Nothing. That evening, they contacted the police. And Australia changed forever. The disappearance shocked the nation. It wasn't just the suddenness, it was the complete lack of evidence. No screams, no bodies, no witnesses who could say exactly what happened. Just 3 children who had vanished in broad daylight. Witnesses said they had seen the Beaumont kids that morning playing in the shallow water laughing. Some said they were with a tall, thin man, blonde, well-dressed in his 30s. He was seen playing games with them, helping them with their towels, even watching over them like a guardian. Others recalled seeing the children later buying pastries from a nearby bakery. Oddly, they purchased meat pies and sweets items they had never bought before. Their mother found this strange, as they hadn't taken enough money for all that food. And Jane, always careful with money, wouldn't have changed the plan unless something convinced her to. Some even said they saw the children walking away from the beach later that day, still with the man. One woman claimed they were skipping and laughing, holding hands. And then, nothing. The timeline grew murky after noon. The children were last clearly seen at around 11 a.m. The man was never identified. Despite massive search efforts, sniffer dogs, divers' helicopters, house-to-house checks, no trace of the children was ever found. No clothing, no bodies, no sign they had ever left the beach. The case quickly became the most high-profile missing persons case in Australian history. The Beaumont name was on every front page. The family was thrust into the spotlight, their grief dissected by the press, their homes surrounded by reporters. Jim and Nancy became national figures, symbols of a broken innocence. They stopped giving interviews. They barely left their house. Strangers sent letters offering visions or dreams about where the children might be. Some claimed they had seen them overseas or grown up under new names. Over the years, dozens of suspects were questioned. One of the most notorious was a convicted pedophile named Bevan Spencer von Einem. He matched the general description and had a disturbing history, but no physical evidence linked him to the case. Another suspect was a man named Harry Phipps, a wealthy factory owner who lived near Glenelg. His own son claimed years later that he believed his father had something to do with the children's disappearance. 2 men also came forward in the 2000s, saying they had dug a hole for Phipps on his property around the time of the disappearance, possibly a grave. Police excavated the site. They found nothing. In the absence of answers, theories multiplied. Some believed the children had been abducted and murdered the same day. Others were convinced they had been taken into a child trafficking ring. There were even rumors that they had been raised in secret by a woman unable to have children brainwashed to forget their former lives. The idea that Jane, the eldest, may have been manipulated to trust the abductor haunts many. She was seen leading her younger siblings, seemingly comfortable with the man. What did he say to win her trust? Was it a lie about knowing their parents, a trick with a lost dog, or a game? The psychological profile compiled years later suggested the man was calculated someone who had groomed the children over previous visits to the beach, possibly watching them for days. The most chilling detail may have come from Nancy herself. She said that Jane had always been cautious and never trusted strangers. But in the days leading up to the abduction, she had made a strange comment. "Mom, we don't need you to come to the beach. The man there is nice." That statement, dismissed at the time, now echoed like a warning. The case went cold, but it was never closed. Every few years, a new tip or theory would bring it back into headlines. In 2013, bones were found during a fresh excavation at a nearby site. Hopes rose, then fell. The bones were animal. Jim and Nancy Beaumont never moved from their home. For decades, they kept the children's bedrooms just as they had left them. Every Christmas, every birthday, they waited. Jim died in 2019, having never found out what happened to his children. Nancy is still alive, though she has withdrawn from public life entirely. The disappearance of the Beaumont children didn't just scar one family, it transformed a country. Before 1966, the idea of letting kids walk to the beach or play in the park was ordinary. After that summer day, everything changed. It was the end of innocence in Australia. 3 children stepped onto a bus and never came back. Despite the heartbreak, Jim and Nancy never gave up hope. For years, Jim traveled the country chasing rumors. In one instance, a letter arrived from a woman in New Zealand who claimed her husband had confessed to killing 3 children in Australia decades earlier. Jim flew. There spoke to authorities, even tried to find the woman. But she had vanished. Nothing came of it. There was also the case of a man who walked into a police station in Melbourne in the 1970s, claiming to be Grant Beaumont. He was small, anxious, and disoriented. Investigators tested his knowledge of the Beaumont family, but he failed basic questions. It turned out he had mental health issues and no connection to the case. Then came the psychics. Some claimed the children were buried beneath a shopping center. Others said their spirits were trapped near the jetty. Police followed up a few of these claims, especially when public pressure rose. But all attempts led nowhere. In the 1990s, a new detective team reopened the case using modern techniques. They interviewed witnesses again, reanalyzed old statements, and brought in forensic experts. They hoped that time might reveal what panic had once obscured. But memories fade. People die. Records are lost. The Glenelg Beach had changed, too. New buildings replaced the old ones. The dunes were flattened. Shops closed. New ones opened. Tourists still came. Sunbathers still lay on the sand. But for those who remembered that day, the beach never felt quite the same. In a cruel twist, a man resembling the original sketch of the suspect was later found to have died in 2004. He had lived a few suburbs away and had prior convictions involving children, but he had never been questioned during the initial investigation. By the time police considered him a serious suspect, he was long buried. What haunted the public was not just the crime, it was the silence that followed. No ransom note, no calls, no physical trace. It was as if the children had been erased from the world. And in a way, they had. Their school left their names on class rolls for years in silent tribute. Glenelg residents left flowers at the beach every January 26th. Strangers who had never met the Beaumonts would leave cards in their mailbox. We remember one note read, "We still hope." True crime, authors, podcasters, and journalists revisited the story over and over, but every attempt led back to the same chilling question. How could 3 children vanish so completely in front of so many? Some criminologists now believe the abductor may have been a transient predator, a person who struck once perfectly and left the country. Others believe the operation was more complex. Someone who knew the family's routines, anticipated their freedom on Australia Day, and timed it down to the hour. But speculation doesn't heal wounds. It doesn't answer the door on birthdays or holidays. The house where the Beaumonts once lived still stands. The children's bedrooms have been repainted, their belongings packed away. But the air in that home, say those who've been there, is thick with memories. Australia grew up after that day. Parental freedoms shrank. Laws changed. So did trust. The case remains officially open. Adelaide police continue to hold files marked with the Beaumont name, though many are yellowed with age. And each year, when the sun rises over Glenelg Beach on January 26th, someone somewhere whispers the names Jane, Arna, Grant. 3 children stepped onto a bus, and the world still waits for them to come home. Case 3. The missing children of Pichilemu, Chile's forgotten vanishings. In the quiet coastal town of Pichilemu, Chile, the sea crashes against black rocks and fishing boats sway gently in the breeze. It's a place known more for surfing than secrets. But between 1973 and 1980, something unspoken darkened the shorelines, something that left over a dozen families with empty chairs at dinner and unanswered prayers. Children began to disappear. It didn't happen all at once. The first case seemed isolated. A boy just 7 vanished while playing outside his grandmother's house near the beach. Police suspected he had drowned, swept away by the tides. But his body was never found, and his shoes, still dry, were discovered 2 blocks inland, neatly placed by a wall. Then it happened again. A 9-year-old girl vanished on her way home from school. Her books were found near a fence behind the town's post office, but there was no sign of a struggle. No one had seen anything, and then it kept happening. Over the next 7 years, at least 15 children disappeared from Pichilemu and surrounding villages. Boys and girls ages 5 to 13. Most vanished in broad daylight on their way to school, running errands, playing by the shore. Always alone, always without witnesses. The local police gave little attention to the pattern. Under General Pinochet's dictatorship, Chile was in turmoil. Civil rights were suspended. Fear silenced communities. Parents who asked too many questions were discouraged or worse. One father who posted flyers about his missing son was reportedly detained for public agitation. He was released 3 days later, bruised and silent. Whispers began to circulate. Some said the military had taken the children. Others blamed a cult or foreign traffickers. Strange vehicles, military jeeps, black vans, even ambulances were seen circling schools and parks in the weeks before new disappearances. One boy claimed he escaped from a group of men who tried to pull him into a white truck. His story was dismissed as fantasy, but the most disturbing details came from those who returned. 3 children long thought dead resurfaced years later, but they weren't the same. The first was a girl named Rosario, who had vanished at age 6. She was found at 13, wandering a marketplace in Santiago, confused and terrified. She didn't recognize her own mother. She didn't remember her name. Her arms bore small round scars as if from repeated injections. A second child, Manuel, reappeared in 1982 in the northern town of La Serena. He was living under a different name, enrolled in a local school. Authorities only identified him after a social worker noticed his resemblance to an old missing poster. Manuel was 9 when he vanished. Now he was 15, barely able to speak above a whisper. His medical records showed signs of malnutrition and bone fractures that had healed improperly. The third case was even stranger. A boy called Esteban had gone missing in 1978. 5 years later, a teenager claiming to be him showed up at a police station. But his fingerprints didn't match the ones taken as a child. DNA testing wasn't available, and he vanished again before any further examination could be done. The returned children offered little clarity. Most were institutionalized or placed in long-term care. When questioned, they spoke of white rooms, needles masked, faces, strange smells, and whispered voices. Some mentioned the clinic by the hills or the woman with silver shoes. Psychologists chalked it up to trauma-induced hallucinations. But for the families, it was evidence. A small group of mothers began to meet in secret. They compiled names, dates, sightings, shared maps, and theories. One claimed to have followed a van into the hills north of town and seen what looked like a fenced compound guarded by armed men. Another found shredded school uniforms in a burned field near an abandoned hospital. One woman, Carmen Rojas, lost 2 sons in the span of 3 years. In 1981, she testified anonymously in a foreign documentary, claiming that she had been threatened by men in uniform after trying to report a sighting of her youngest son alive. She died in a house fire 2 months later. Arson was suspected but never investigated. Over time, documents surfaced leaked reports from military archives that hinted at juvenile medical testing under foreign cooperation. One handwritten note referenced non-permanent subjects recovered from Region 6. Though no names were listed, the region matched Pichilemu. Some journalists tried to pursue the story, but during the dictatorship years, censorship was absolute. Radio hosts disappeared. One reporter who had published a short piece connecting the child vanishings to a rumored biological research lab was found dead in his apartment the next day. Cause of death: suicide. No note. After democracy returned to Chile in the 1990s, a few declassified documents from the Ministry of Health hinted at child displacement protocols enacted during the late 70s, though officials denied any connection to the disappearances. To this day, no one has been charged. No graves have been found. No institution has taken responsibility. But the children are still missing. Pichilemu's current mayor refuses to comment on the historical cases. The local police archive still has the original missing person files, thin, faded, incomplete. Some are labeled closed. Others were never opened in the first place. The town has grown. Tourists come to surf and sip pisco by the sea. But in the homes of those who remember, silence still hangs like smoke. 15 children vanished. 3 returned, but not as themselves. And no one, not the police, not the government, not even the truth ever came back. One woman who refused to forget was Teresa Morales. Her daughter Camila had vanished on the walk home from Sunday school in 1977. Teresa spent years visiting orphanages, clinics, even psychiatric wards across the country. She carried a worn photograph of Camila everywhere, laminated to withstand time. In 1994, Teresa received an anonymous envelope containing a drawing of a little girl behind bars with the word Cerro scrawled in red pencil, a possible reference to Cerro La Cruz, a forested hill near a now abandoned military complex. She hiked the hill alone the next morning and found nothing, but she said she heard something strange that day: laughter echoing from the trees, followed by a scream. When she reported it, the station said it was probably kids playing. Her daughter was never found. By the early 2000s, a new generation of Chileans journalists, documentarians, human rights lawyers began piecing together the child disappearances alongside other dictatorship-era abuses. The cases from Pichilemu were included in shadow files under the classification collateral losses. In 2009, a Chilean filmmaker released a documentary titled Los Niños Perdidos de Pichilemu, The Lost Children of Pichilemu. It featured interviews with surviving family members, declassified military memos, and eerie reenactments based on the surviving children's fragmented testimonies. The documentary received critical acclaim, but also anonymous threats. The filmmaker moved to Spain shortly after its release. One segment from the film described a covert facility called Unidad 23, believed to be a medical outpost run under the guise of a tuberculosis clinic. Locals remembered seeing U.S. doctors arrive by helicopter in the late 70s. The building was burned down in 1983. A handful of photos survived grainy images showing child-sized beds lined up under harsh overhead lights, a chalkboard with anatomical drawings, and a tray of metal syringes. International attention came briefly in 2011 when a group of Chilean families petitioned the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, presenting evidence of willful government neglect and cover-up. The commission agreed to review the case, but progress stalled, buried under bureaucracy and lack of cooperation from Chilean authorities. As of 2025, only 2 of the returned children are still alive. One resides in a long-term psychiatric care center in Concepcion. The other, whose identity is kept private now, lives under a new name in Europe, supported by a human rights nonprofit. He occasionally shares memories with researchers of white corridors, voices through intercoms a doll whose eyes moved on their own. Whether these were actual memories or the mind's way of coping, no one can say for sure. But his drawings are consistent. He draws the same room over and over, a narrow bed, a locked door, and a window that shows no sky, only a blank white wall. In Pichilemu, there is now a mural tucked behind a bakery on Calle Comercio. It depicts 15 faceless children in faded school uniforms holding hands in a line that disappears into the sea mist. Locals leave candles beneath it each January, no ceremony, no speeches, just flickers of light for names barely spoken aloud. The disappearances are not taught in schools. They do not appear in official textbooks, yet they happened. And somewhere, perhaps in forgotten files or fading photographs, the truth waits to be found. 15 children walked into the sun. Only silence came back. 3 disappearances. No bodies, no answers. Just silence and time. If these stories stayed with you, there are more waiting down the road. Subscribe for more true crime that lingers long after the engine stops.